me, sometimes it seems like things happen, but you also use it as an excuse not to exercise. I've looked back and seen where you haven't really tried or hadn't really put the effort in. I really love Kim, and I want to see her get healthier. But I think it could potentially be a deal breaker if she is not going to commit to her health. It makes me wonder, is she committed to me?
Teegan, could me and you get a picture together?
For what? It annoys me that he's asking to take a picture, given that he never has before, because that's like a couple thing, and I know that's probably how he means it. And for a long time there in our relationship, Ethan would just say or do things just to get by. And so I don't know if he means anything.
How have you been?
I've been really great. Enjoying marriage, discovering marriage.
When you say discovering marriage, what's on your mind when you say that?
I'm not married yet, so I don't know. Oh, man. I mean, at the beginning, the first thing we had to really work through was just everything that happened with the family. I didn't know how much I, just shut down when things get tense or there's confrontation or I've always just avoided it at all costs.
I'm on a coffee date with my mom. My mom's been there for everything. Highs, lows, bottoming out, mountain peaks, everything. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
Waiting on anything else?
No, we're good. Thank you. She definitely helped me through a lot of this in more ways than I could ever think before.
You had your big trip. What was that?
It was fine. I got to see Isaac, Keelan, and Mariah again, and that was nice. It just picked up where we left off, essentially. I sort of felt bad because when we were there, I felt like Ethan was really emotional, but you know how he is. He internalizes it and sort of shuts down. Yeah.
Ken does not open this conversation with a gentle suggestion, a casual reminder, or one of those harmless little comments couples make when they are trying to sound supportive while secretly stepping on a landmine. Because what he says to Kim lands much heavier than that. And the reason it hits so hard is not just because he is talking about exercise or health. It is because he connects her progress to the future of their relationship. And suddenly, this is not a conversation about taking more walks, eating better, or trying to stay active as they get older. It becomes a conversation about whether Kim is proving that she is committed enough to him. That is the part that changes everything, because Ken can say he loves Kim, and he can say he wants her around for a long time, and he can say he wants both of them to be healthy enough to enjoy the life they keep talking about building together. But the moment he suggests her lack of progress could be a deal breaker, the emotional meaning shifts completely. And now Kim is not just hearing concern, she is hearing a condition attached to love, which is exactly why this scene feels so uncomfortable to watch. And what makes it even more complicated is that Ken does not sound like someone who is simply angry in the moment, because he makes it clear that he has been thinking about this for a while, looking back at the times when Kim said she would work on things, comparing those promises to what he believes he has actually seen. And in his mind, the issue is no longer only about whether she exercised today or skipped a day. It is about whether her actions match the future she says she wants with him. But from Kim's side, this is not that simple, because she is in her 50s. She says weight loss is harder than it used to be. And there is a difference between struggling with change and not caring, even though those two things can look dangerously similar to someone watching from the outside, especially when that person is already looking for proof. That is where the real tension sits, because Ken seems to be asking for evidence before he fully commits, while Kim seems to be asking for safety before she can fully open herself up to the pressure of change. And when two people need opposite things at the same time, one person's reassurance can start sounding like judgment, and one person's fear can start sounding like an ultimatum. The most revealing part is that Ken frames the issue as love and long-term commitment, saying that if Kim does not put in the effort, it makes him wonder whether she cares enough about their future. And that is the line that pushes this scene into a much deeper place, because now her health journey is being used as a symbol for loyalty, discipline, respect, and readiness for marriage, which is a lot of emotional weight to put on one person's body, one person's habits, and one person's private struggle. Kim's reaction tells us she feels that weight immediately, because she does not just hear a partner asking how he can help, she hears a man she loves suggesting there may be a point where he stops waiting, and that makes every future promise between them feel less secure. Even the idea of a proposal, which should feel romantic, now sits under the shadow of one uncomfortable question. Would Ken be asking Kim to marry him because he accepts her, or because she finally passed the test he needed her to pass? And this is why the episode cannot be treated like a simple relationship disagreement, because underneath the surface, the same pattern is already starting to appear elsewhere, with Ethan trying to win back trust from Teegan, while Teegan keeps emotional distance. And in both situations, someone wants proof before they feel safe enough to move forward, which means this episode is not really about Montana, weight loss, or one awkward conversation on the farm. It is about what happens when love starts asking for receipts. And this is where the episode starts to quietly shift. Because after Ken and Kim's conversation makes commitment feel like something that has to be proven, the Montana trip shows that the same problem is happening in a completely different form. Only this time it is Ethan standing there trying to get close to Teegan again, while Teegan is clearly not ready to hand him the same access he used to have. And that difference matters because Ethan is not just asking for a picture, or a soft moment, or a little sign that things are warming back up. He is really asking for evidence that the door is still open. That is why the small moments in Montana feel heavier than they should. Because on the surface, it looks like a family trip, a mountain view, a couple of people trying to enjoy the scenery, and one awkward man trying to make something feel normal again. But underneath all of that, Ethan is testing the temperature of a relationship that no longer belongs to him in the way he wants it to. And Teegan is trying to be kind without accidentally giving him permission to believe they are already rebuilding something romantic. And that is a difficult line to walk, because when someone has hurt you, and then they come back softer, more emotional, more careful, and more willing to say the right things, it can be hard to tell whether they have truly changed or whether they have simply learned what they need to say to regain access, which is exactly why Teegan's hesitation becomes one of the most important parts of the episode. Because she is not slamming the door, but she is not opening it either. And that middle space is where Ethan has to sit with the consequences of whatever happened before. The picture moment says a lot without needing to become a huge fight, because Ethan seems to see it as a simple way to create closeness. But Teegan reads it as something deeper, almost like he is reaching for a couple-coded moment before the relationship has earned that space again. And that is where the viewer starts to realize that this episode is not just showing one couple under pressure, it is showing different people trying to define what commitment even means after trust has been shaken. Then, Lydia's conversation brings in a completely different emotional texture, because when she talks about marriage, intimacy, patience, and feeling safe with Zach, her version of commitment does not sound like a test, and it does not sound like a chase. It sounds like a place where someone slowed down enough to make the other person feel protected. And whether viewers agree with every part of her worldview or not, that contrast is important because it quietly exposes what is missing from the other relationships. For Lydia, commitment seems to mean safety before pressure. But for Ken, commitment seems to mean action before certainty. And for Ethan, commitment seems to mean another chance before the door fully closes. While Teegan seems to believe commitment cannot be rushed, just because someone is finally ready to fight for it. And this is why the episode starts feeling more layered than a simple recap of who said what, because every storyline is circling the same emotional wound from a different direction. Ken wants proof through Kim's effort. Ethan wants hope through Teegan's response. Kim wants reassurance that she is not being measured. And Teegan wants enough distance to know whether her feelings are real or just being pulled back by history. And once you see that pattern, the episode becomes much more uncomfortable because nobody is asking for something completely unreasonable, but nobody is giving the other person exactly what they need either. That is what makes this part so uneasy, because there are now two unstable relationships sitting beside one marriage conversation that sounds calmer, safer, and more emotionally secure. And the question is no longer just whether Kim will follow a health plan or whether Ethan can win Teegan back. The real question is whether these people are creating healthy boundaries, or whether they are hiding behind those boundaries because being fully honest would force them to admit how unsure they really are. This is where the episode becomes impossible to watch from only one side, because the moment Ken tells Kim that her lack of progress could make him question the future, viewers are almost forced to choose a position, And the messy part is that both reactions make sense depending on what part of the conversation you are focused on, because one viewer may hear Ken as a man who is genuinely afraid of losing the life he wants with Kim, while another viewer may hear a man placing the future of the relationship on her body, her discipline, and her ability to change fast enough to make him feel secure. And that is why this scene works so well for commentary, because it does not hand the audience a clean villain, even though the internet would love one, since apparently watching two people struggle is not enough anymore, unless everyone immediately gets assigned a team jersey, because Ken can be coming from a real place of fear and still say something that hurts, and Kim can genuinely need to take her health seriously while still feeling crushed by the way that concern is being delivered. From Ken's side, he is not talking like someone who wants a short-term relationship, because he keeps bringing the conversation back to forever, to being healthy together, to being happy together, to possibly walking down the aisle one day. And in his mind, if Kim keeps saying she wants that same future but he does not see the effort he expects, then the gap between her words and actions starts to feel like a warning sign. But from Kim's side, that same logic can feel deeply unfair, because once Ken says it is hard to commit fully until he sees full commitment from her, the message stops sounding like support and starts sounding like she is being evaluated. And when someone already feels vulnerable about age, weight, and the difficulty of changing habits later in life, being evaluated by the person you love can make even helpful advice feel like rejection wearing a friendly shirt. That is the uncomfortable middle of this whole episode. Because Ken may not be trying to shame Kim, but his words give the relationship a conditional feeling, and Kim may not be trying to avoid responsibility, but the pressure makes every step forward feel less like personal growth and more like proof she has to submit before the relationship can feel safe again. And the Ethan and Teegan storyline brings that same emotional tension from a different angle, because Ethan may truly be trying to repair what was broken. He may honestly want the chance to love Teegan better than he did before, but Teegan's hesitation matters because a changed tone does not automatically rebuild trust, and a person who is hurt is allowed to move slowly, even when the other person finally seems ready. That is why the Christmas boundary is so revealing, because Teegan's family does not treat Ethan like someone they hate. They still show compassion. They still make sure he is not completely alone on a day that means something, but they also do not fully bring him back inside the emotional center of the family. And that says more than a dramatic confrontation would have said, because it creates a line between kindness and access. So now the episode has two relationships caught in the same trap, with Ken wanting visible proof from Kim before he feels ready to fully commit, Ethan wanting emotional proof from Teegan before he can believe there is still hope, Kim wanting reassurance that she is loved beyond her progress, and Teegan wanting enough distance to figure out whether her openness is healing or just history pulling her back in. And the real turning point is not whether Kim agrees to walk, or whether Ethan gets another conversation, or whether Teegan says the door is not completely closed. Because the real turning point is whether these people are moving from love or fear, and whether the boundaries they are creating are actually protecting them, or quietly becoming a way to avoid saying the harder truth out loud. What happens after the confrontation is almost more revealing than the confrontation itself, because once Ken puts the future of the relationship on the table, Kim and Ken do not explode. They do not walk away, and they do not turn it into one of those dramatic reality TV exits where someone storms off just far enough for the camera to follow them, but instead, they try to make a plan. And that is where the scene becomes even more complicated, because a plan can look like healing from the outside while still carrying the weight of the thing that made it necessary in the first place. Kim agrees that they need to come up with something and actually stick to it, and Ken softens enough to ask what she needs from him, whether she wants him to push or whether pushing would only make it worse. But even with that softer tone, the earlier words are still sitting between them, because Kim now knows this is not just about feeling better or getting healthier. She knows Ken has already admitted there is a line somewhere in his mind where lack of progress starts to affect whether he can fully commit. That changes the power in the relationship, because Ken is no longer just the supportive boyfriend hoping for a healthier future. He becomes the person holding the question of marriage, commitment, and long-term security in one hand, while asking Kim to prove effort with the other. And even if he believes he is doing it out of love, that kind of pressure can make every walk, every meal choice, every skipped day, and every promise feel like evidence being collected in a case neither of them wants to admit exists. Kim tries to take some control back by saying she will keep working on herself, not just for Ken, but for herself and for her girls. And that matters because it keeps her from sounding like she is changing, only to keep a man from leaving. But then she adds that painful little condition that she will keep trying for Ken if he sticks around. And that is where the emotion really lands, because underneath the agreement is still a woman wondering whether the person beside her is supporting her or silently waiting to see if she becomes enough. And then Ken talks about wanting them both to be in good health, wanting to one day see them married, wanting them to look good walking down the aisle. And on one level, that sounds like a future. It sounds like hope. It sounds like two people imagining a shared life. But on another level, it also makes the proposal feel tied to performance, like the dream is still there, but the road to it now runs through a test Kim has to keep passing. That is why Kim saying she would gladly say yes if Ken proposed does not land as simple romance, because now the audience has to hold two feelings at once: the sweetness of her wanting that future and the worry that she may be wanting it from a place where she already feels uncertain about whether Ken will stay, which is exactly the kind of emotional contradiction this episode keeps feeding us, like apparently peace was not available in the family discount package. The same thing happens with Ethan and Teegan, only the power is reversed, because Ethan wants possibility, but Teegan controls the pace, and she is not cruel about it. She is not pretending there is no history, and she is not shutting every door, but she is also not letting his effort decide the timeline, which leaves Ethan in the uncomfortable position of having hope without security. That Christmas moment says more than a dramatic speech ever could, because Teegan and her family still care enough to make sure he is not alone. They still extend kindness. They still give him a plate and some sense of community, but they do not fully bring him inside. And that boundary is quiet but sharp, because it says, we can have compassion for you without giving you full access again. So by the end of this section, both couples are standing in the same unstable place, where nobody has completely left, but nobody has completely returned either. Kim and Ken have a plan but not full emotional safety. Ethan has a possibility but not full trust. Teegan has openness but not surrender. And that may be the most dangerous stage of all, because it lets everyone keep hoping while forcing them to live with the consequences of what has already been said. By the end, the episode is not really asking whether Kim should exercise more, whether Ken should care about health, whether Ethan deserves another chance, or whether Teegan should keep the door open. Because those are the surface questions, the easier questions, the ones people argue about first because they feel simple enough to turn into sides. But underneath all of that, every storyline is asking the same uncomfortable thing. What happens when love starts needing proof before it feels safe? Ken wants proof from Kim that she is serious about their future. And maybe that comes from a real fear, because he talks about wanting both of them to be healthy, happy, and together for a long time. But the problem is that fear does not stay harmless once it turns into a test. And when he connects Kim's health progress to whether he can fully commit, he changes the meaning of support from something shared into something Kim has to perform well enough to keep. That does not mean Kim's health does not matter, and it does not mean Ken is automatically wrong for wanting a partner who takes care of herself, because long-term relationships do involve real choices, real habits, and real responsibility. But the emotional danger is in the way the message lands, because Kim does not just hear, "I want you to be okay." She hears, "I need you to change before I can feel certain about us." And that is a very different kind of pressure. And that is where the episode gives its clearest answer, because concern becomes control when the person receiving it feels like love is now attached to performance. And once that happens, even a healthy goal can start feeling like a punishment. Even a walk can feel like evidence. And even a plan that was supposed to bring two people closer can quietly become a scoreboard. Ethan and Teegan are dealing with the same emotional equation from the opposite direction, because Ethan wants proof that Teegan's heart is still reachable, while Teegan needs proof that his change is real and not just temporary effort caused by fear of losing her. And that is why her day-by-day approach matters, because she is not rejecting every possibility, but she is also refusing to let his regret rush her healing. That is the part Ethan has to accept if he really wants to rebuild anything, because trust cannot be forced just because someone finally feels ready to fix what they helped break. And Teegan's boundary is not cruelty. It is controlled access. The kind of access people create when they still care, but are not willing to hand their safety back to someone simply because the person showed up with better words this time. Lydia's marriage conversation becomes the quiet contrast to everything else, because her version of commitment is built around patience, safety, and letting someone feel ready without pressure. And whether viewers agree with every choice she describes or not, that relationship functions as the emotional mirror in the episode, showing what commitment looks like when one person is not being pushed to prove they deserve love before they receive tenderness. So Kim and Ken may still have a future, and Ethan and Teegan may still have a path, but neither storyline can move forward in a healthy way if proof becomes more important than safety. Because Kim cannot grow if every step feels like a relationship evaluation, and Ethan cannot rebuild trust if he treats Teegan's caution like an obstacle instead of a consequence. The final truth is that nobody in this episode is standing on completely solid ground, because Kim wants the proposal but fears the condition attached to it. Ken wants forever but still needs visible proof. Ethan wants another chance but has not earned full access. And Teegan leaves the door open just enough to keep hope alive, without giving away control of her own healing. And maybe that is why this episode feels heavier than a normal family recap, because it is not really about wait, Montana, or one apology. It is about the painful space between wanting someone and not fully trusting what comes next. And by the time everything settles, the question left behind is simple, but brutal. Can love still feel safe when someone is quietly measuring whether you are worth staying for?